think this is his first speech on the floor. Representative Frost.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We've heard the word shameful a lot during this debate. But what's really shameful is the fact that my Democratic colleagues and I are willing to both say we condemn all violence and also put it on paper. But with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, all we hear is talk. They're not willing to condemn all violence in this resolution. It's a one-sided resolution meant to fan the flames of anti-abortion and anti-freedom sentiment in this country. See, my district in Central Florida sees these sentiments in action as our governor has passed an abortion ban and looks to go even further, and as someone whose birth mother made the brave and difficult decision to put me up for adoption, I recognize that that decision was deeply personal and can often mark one of the most vulnerable points in a person's life. No one should take advantage of that, and the federal government should actually protect it. I will continue to fight for civil rights, personal freedom, and bodily autonomy of women and childbearing adults in this country, and I hope the rest of this chamber will join me in voting no. Thank you.
For 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition of this resolution because the American people know that the biggest threat to our modern democratic society and free market economy is not some socialist boogeyman, it's Republican leaders in this chamber. People who want to call every federally funded program that Americans depend on socialism just to scare people and position themselves to cut and gut the benefits that people count on. Go back and look at the decades worth of transcripts and see what Republicans call socialism to scare people. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act. They even call free public school education socialism to scare people. This vote is a sham. We've heard about Cuba a ton. My mother came here from Cuba in the late 1960s with my grandmother, my aunt, and I won't let their story be used to gut the benefits that our people have earned and deserve. This vote has nothing to do with socialism and everything to do with gutting the programs that millions of Americans have paid into and have earned. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from California.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Representative Frost.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, before I start, earlier, I believe I heard Mr. Gosar say something about President Biden's immigration policies being more big brother, more control, and more changing our culture. I just wanted clarification. Is that what Mr. Gosar said? Okay. Changing our culture. I understand what he's trying to say. But I believe that immigrants are American and thus a part of American culture. You know, it's unfortunate that this hearing started off with a ton of hyperbole and posturing, saying that President Biden and his administration have created the worst border crisis in American history. That isn't about oversight. It's about stoking the fears of immigrants and those seeking asylum. And it's something I take personally as a son of a Cuban refugee. Look, for many folks around the country who might only watch far-right media or just listen to even some of the folks on this committee, I'm curious, Chief Chavez, when President Biden took office, did your agents stop enforcing the border and just allow everybody to come in, thus creating what we hear here is an open border? Did that happen when the president took office?
Sir, thank you for your question. The answer is no, sir.
Okay,
we
thank you.
continue to enforce policy and laws.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Chief Modlin, when President Biden took office, did the border just open and did y'all stop enforcing your policies?
Also, thank you for your question, sir. I can tell you this is the 5th administration I've worked for, starting with the Clinton administration, and Border Patrol agents do their job every day.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Look, as y'all probably realize by now, a lot of these hearings are not really about solutions, they're about politics. And for me, I believe solutions must be rooted in facts. I know y'all probably watch the news and are aware of what's going on politically. Would you agree that the narrative being peddled right now that says that an insane amount of fentanyl is being brought into this country by illegal immigrants specifically, would you say that is true?
Sir, again, we're here to report on the facts on border security. I probably defer from giving an opinion on anything in the news right now.
With the data, right?
Because that's probably doubtful. I can't provide
all
a
good. Thank
factual
you, Chief.
statement.
No, I appreciate it. I agree, right? It has to be rooted in the data. You know, a Cato Institute report and CBP data shows that more than 85% of the illicit fentanyl entering the United States is brought in by citizens of the United States of America. So, Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record the 2022 Cato Institute report demonstrating that illicit fentanyl is primarily trafficked by U.S. citizens at lawful ports of entry.
Without objection.
Thank you. Look, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would have us believe that the solution to the fentanyl problem in this country is to discourage both illegal and legal immigration. In comes the wall, which we've heard a lot about. You know, we know that crossings haven't decreased since we spent $15 billion, once again, $15 billion with a B, of taxpayer money on that monument of fear. The wall kind of reminds me of a sad, decaying Soviet statue. Is the bigger failure that migrants are able to breach the wall or find their way around it? Chief Monlin.
Thank you for the question, sir. One thing I would say, I think it's worth pointing out, especially Mr. Garcia just came back in the room. I'm glad you did. You talked about being an immigrant and being proud of the country. I can tell you a week ago, I was in San Diego, drove past the Scottish Rite Center, and the agent next to me said, I smile every time I see that building. And I said, why? He said, because I was born in Tijuana. And that's the place where I naturalized and became a U.S. citizen. And so I do hope, you know, when you all make it down to the border, you talk to the Border Patrol agents and recognize that a great number of them are immigrants to the country as well, or first generations like yourself, Mr. Frost.
And Chief, on that story, so the senator who's naturalized in was across the border, and something he saw from Mexico.
So
it was like a beacon of hope, is what you're saying.
Well, this was pretty significantly into San Diego, but he grew up on the border, you know, Tijuana. You can certainly see across the border.
And he saw it as a beacon of hope.
And his family recognized opportunity in the United States.
Being able to see directly in our country, yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes.
That's amazing. That's a great story to hear. You know, for 2 years of campaigning, we've heard about the border, the border, the border. And here we are, and yet we're not being solutions-oriented. It's hyperbole and lies. And I want to be clear, and we've heard this time and time and again, and I'll say it again. The situation deserves this committee's attention, because there is a crisis at the border. But the crisis is not a criminal one, it's a humanitarian one. And it's an important fact to keep in mind. I appreciate y'all's work, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate y'all being here today. Unemployment insurance programs are essential to emergency lifelines. Obviously, when the pandemic hit and millions of Americans could not work, Congress passed expanded unemployment benefits to keep people fed, keep people housed. Government did its job. But it quickly became obvious that without functional state infrastructure, which we've spoken about a little bit to distribute it, that aid can and a lot of times can get wasted. That's where a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse really stems from. And we have to talk about these antiquated state unemployment insurance systems wasting the time and abusing people who are facing hard times. I want to return quickly to a question that my colleague from Arizona had brought up. He seemed pretty specifically concerned with the state of California's unemployment system. Mr. Shoemaker, you indicated that identity theft was one of those issues. Would you say this issue was unique to California, or did many states experience this problem with identity theft verification?
I believe Mr. Turner was speaking about unemployment insurance relative to California. For SBA, though, the EIDL program did experience identity theft. I'd be happy to speak to that, but I think the question about California is down to Mr. Turner.
Yeah, Mr. Turner.
Yes, I think in the early days, the first maybe 5 or 6 months, California had a high rate because there was not really good scrutinization when it came to Social Security numbers.
Yeah, but was this a problem that was unique to California?
No, that was a
states?
problem that occurred throughout the country.
Okay, so it was a problem that occurred throughout the country. Yeah, you know, in my state, there are reports that have come out that show that our Governor DeSantis knew about, my bad, the seat was falling on me. In my state, Governor DeSantis knew before the pandemic that Florida's unemployment system had major problems, glitches, and different messages. There was no really serious attempts to help remedy those problems. At the height of the pandemic, my state of Florida actually had the worst unemployment system, slowest unemployment system in the country in terms of processing claims. And at one point, the system crashed. People had to move to using paper forms. State representatives, mine, Anna Scamani, had to really step up to really really help people through the process. And we're still hearing from constituents that are having problems with the website right now. This means in days of hunger, people not knowing if they have enough money to buy groceries and et cetera, it helps increase that anxiety and desperation. Mr. Turner, are certain states still challenged to pay unemployment insurance claims in a timely manner?
Certain states are still challenged, and part of it has been because of the lack of IT modernization that we've pointed out on a lot of our reviews, and the antiquated systems that they had at the beginning of the pandemic, which still have not been completely addressed yet.
What's being done to modernize these states' IT systems so that way unemployed workers don't suffer, lengthy delays to receive their benefits?
Well, I think it's going to require more oversight on the department's part to make sure that the funds that are being given are being utilized. During the Recovery Act of 2010, there was $7 billion that was set aside for IT modernization, and I think about $2 billion of that actually went to benefits payments. And so, and another $1.3 billion did not get used in the time that it was required.
Gotcha. Now to turn to the solutions. Congress enacted the American Rescue Plan, $3.1 billion to modernize and strengthen federal unemployment insurance systems. Mr. Turner, if a state unemployment insurance system is modernized, do you think that directly translates to a more efficient and effective user experience?
Without a doubt.
Yeah. And would you agree that that means there's less waste, there's less fraud, there's less abuse when we're able to put more money into those IT systems?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. Pray to my home state of Florida would take advantage of the opportunity to modernize the IT system so constituents are better served. Thank you all for your time, and I yield back. I plan on acknowledging three people. Both of them are not in this room anymore. Folks who I've worked with and that I know, Manny and Patricia Oliver, who lost their son, Joaquin Oliver, in the Parkland shooting. To lose a child to gun violence, to see the photos of your child sitting in a pool of blood, I can't imagine that. Manny and Patricia have dedicated their lives to fighting for a world where true justice can be achieved because, unfortunately, there is no justice for the dead. And true justice is ensuring that this never happens again. I fight alongside Manny and Patricia Oliver. I believe that they are American heroes. And what they always say is they don't want their son Joaquin to be remembered as a victim. They want him to be remembered as an activist. And today, Republicans on this committee chose to sit in front of those parents and the survivors and organizers and advocates that are in the audience right now. People who are reliving their trauma, listening through this, people impacted by gun violence across the nation, and show that their priority is gun lobby money, manufacturers who profit off death, and creating fake narratives for political gain. Again, the leading cause of death for kids in America is guns. And today's hearing is about distracting the people from the truth. They want you to believe that the greater threat is the ATF, and not the facts that are in front of us. We heard one of my colleagues bring up facts. Let's look at the facts, and I just said them. 100 people a day. And I know it's easy to say a number and forget that behind every number, there's a human. There's a Joaquin Oliver. Enough is enough, not one more. And to all the organizers, advocates, survivors, and families here today, I'm so sorry that you've had to sit through this hearing. I'm so sorry that you had to see what happened outside to Manny and Patricia, who are just fighting for a world where no other parents have to go through what they went through. And I, for one, believe this has nothing to do with policy and everything to do with politics. And I won't be listening to another second of it, and I wouldn't blame you all if you made the same decision. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Representative Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce for the record
The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Frost.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 5. I rise in opposition as someone who's actually been a student in our public school system within the last decade. I rise as someone who is the son of a public school educator, special education teacher of 37 years. Love you, Mom. And I also rise as someone who sat on my local school board for 2 years as the student representative. This bill is modeled after one that I know very well, Florida's parental rights in the education law. Most of us know it as Don't Say Gay. And don't say gay infringements on parents' rights, including LGBTQ+ and supportive parents. Bills like this make schools more hostile, and make no mistake, it results in hate, bigotry, and yes, sometimes death of our students in schools. Republican lawmakers won't even allow my amendment to be considered that protects the First Amendment rights of parents. We want to talk about parental rights. What about their First Amendment right to fight for their children, LGBTQ+ children, who are fighting for gender-affirming and life-saving care? One of my colleagues brought this up, but this bill focuses on parents' rights, but what about the rights of our students? What about the rights of our young people? Why are my Republican colleagues not advocating for our students? Is it because they know that the majority of young people despise legislation like this and do not support legislation like this that is bigoted? Is it because this generation is the most progressive generation this country has ever seen, because they want a world where everybody can succeed, where we see the world through the eyes of the most vulnerable? See, the party is branded on freedom and liberty, but what about the freedom and liberties of young people and students who actually sit in the classroom? I mean, if Republican lawmakers cared so much about what's happening in our schools, they would focus on feeding kids so we can ensure that everyone can learn on a full stomach. If Republican lawmakers cared so much about what's happening in our schools, they would make sure that students have updated technology, teachers have the resources they need so students can actually learn. If Republican lawmakers cared so much about what's happening in schools, what about the kids who are gunned down in their classrooms? The leading cause of death in this country being gun violence for young people. None of that is in this bill. This bill is just a vehicle for hate and political nonsense, pushing a chosen wedge issue. It's not about policy, it's about politics. It's not about freedom and liberty, it's about the fear of a problem that doesn't exist. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Representative Frost.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. You know, I'm glad to hear that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and I've heard it said time and time again, are very concerned about the overreach of government. And I want to give a suggestion. We should look at a state where government is very much overreaching, my state of Florida, where our Governor Ron DeSantis is abusing the power of the state to target people who disagree with him. And so if folks want to talk about government overreach, I suggest going to where it is the worst, in fascist Governor DeSantis. I'll also say this. We heard people talking about, folks talking about disabled veterans, which is an incredibly important issue to me, as my father and a lot of folks in my families are veterans. I come from a military family. But I just want to state for the record, no disabled veteran group submitted public comment about the ATF rule as an issue. And when we reached out to these groups, they advised that they do not intend on taking that position. Mr. Wilcox, do you want to speculate why they're not wanting to comment on this?
I'm reticent to speak for another organization, but I'd have to guess that it's because they don't see it as a disabled veterans issue. Okay,
Thank you. Mr. Wilcox, how many people did we lose last year due to gun violence?
There was 48,830 people killed by guns in this country last year.
I know we lose 100 lives a day due to gun violence. Hundreds are shot a day, and thousands survive shootings. Is that correct, Mr. Wilcox?
That's right, and my numbers actually were for 2021, not
For
last year.
Over time, is this problem getting worse, or is it getting better?
Sadly and tragically, it is getting worse. The rate of gun deaths has increased 39% from 2012 to 2021.
Does the premise of this hearing get us any closer to solving gun violence?
I think at times we've talked about the value of ATF and common sense gun laws, but I think the premise itself that does not get us, of the hearing, much closer to the solutions that we need to this gun violence epidemic.
I just heard one of my colleagues bring up the fact that this hearing's about a brace and it's not about gun violence or victims or anything like that. And I think it goes to show just how much people don't understand what it means to take a step back and look at an issue holistically. And that's why this is about everything. It's about victims. It's about the brace. It's about the families. It's about the fact that if you have a child in this country and God forbid they die before the age of 18, the most likely reason is because they were shot to death in this country in 2023. You know, I plan on acknowledging three people. Both of them are not in this room anymore. Folks who I've worked with and that I know, Manny and Patricia Oliver, who lost their son, Joaquin Oliver, in the Parkland shooting. To lose a child to gun violence, to see the photos of your child sitting in a pool of blood, I can't imagine that. You know, Manny and Patricia have dedicated their lives to fighting for a world where true justice can be achieved because, unfortunately, there is no justice for the dead, and true justice is ensuring that this never happens again. I fight alongside Manny and Patricia Oliver. I believe that they are American heroes, and what they always say is they don't want their son Joaquin to be remembered as a victim. They want him to be remembered as an activist. And today, Republicans on this committee chose to sit in front of those parents and the survivors and organizers and advocates that are in the audience right now, people who are reliving their trauma, listening through this, people impacted by gun violence across the nation, and show that their priority is gun lobby money, manufacturers who profit off death, and creating fake narratives for political gain. Again, the leading cause of death for kids in America is guns. And today's hearing is about distracting the people from the truth. They want you to believe that the greater threat is the ATF and not the facts that are in front of us. We heard one of my colleagues bring up facts. Let's look at the facts, and I just said them. 100 people a day. And I know it's easy to say a number and forget that behind every number, there's a human. There's a Joaquin Oliver. Enough is enough. Not one more. And to all the organizers, advocates, survivors, and families here today, I'm so sorry that you've had to sit through this hearing. I'm so sorry that you had to see what happened outside to Manny and Patricia, who are just fighting for a world where no other parents have to go through what they went through. And I, for one, believe this has nothing to do with policy and everything to do with politics. And I won't be listening to another second of it, and I wouldn't blame you all if you made the same decision. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Representative Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce for the record.
A minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today because I am furious. Angry that 3 kids died today in Nashville, Tennessee. Angry that hundreds of parents had to cry their eyes out today, not knowing if their child would come home from school. And angry that we have to live day after day when we turn on the news to see rampant gun violence claiming life after life. And all of this is because politicians in this chamber that have been bought and paid for by the NRA, that put profits over people, over human lives. Cowards who wasted our time last week, passing a parental bill of rights, not giving a damn about the rights of children to be able to go to their classroom without the fear of being gunned down due to senseless gun violence. It is likely that at this moment, the next mass shooter is planning their shooting. What will this chamber do about it? I filed my last bill last week to simply create a federal office of gun violence prevention. 3 kids are dead today, and every day that we wait, 100 more people die. I pray to God that there are some Republicans in this chamber that can help support my legislation to save lives. I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Frost, for 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The D.C. Home Rule Act was passed in 1973 and established the 12 members of the D.C. Council in the chairman's position, all who serve 4-year terms. Each 4 years, elected officials make their case, and D.C. voters decide who represents them in which positions. A black man was lynched in broad daylight, and the Washington, D.C. City Council took action to make public safety work for everybody. And now Republicans on this committee are pissed about it. And I'm wondering what happened to the Republican Party. I thought this was the party of small government, yet here they are weaponizing this committee to overturn laws passed by duly elected officials of a city council. It's really interesting. And so today I've heard my Republican colleagues talk about the impact of gun deaths and violence in a local community, and it is great to hear the renewed interest in gun violence. You know, it's an important conversation that shouldn't be reserved for just this D.C. hearing. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record reports on gun deaths in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Wyoming, Republican-led states, by the way, the 3 states with the highest rates of gun deaths per 100,000 residents. And if we're going down this road, maybe we'll see the individuals of these Republican state legislatures here today, or here soon. This is a devastating reality, and I'm curious why there isn't equitable attention and outrage on gun deaths in these states as there is with what's going on in D.C. Recently, I'm seeing a trend where state and federal officials are deciding that they know best instead of respecting local control, and they want to impose their views on Americans across the country. And don't get me wrong, I don't agree with every local policy out there in the entire country, especially in my home state of Florida. But I respect that certain decisions are made under home rule, and when it comes to rolling back local policies that were democratically elected, decided, I just haven't heard a single rationale that I'm sympathetic to. Chairman Mendelson, I wanted to make something pretty clear. When you ran for office, you had to make the case to the D.C. voters that you were the best person to represent their interests, correct?
Correct.
When you were first elected to represent the residents of D.C., what'd you do when you ran for office? How'd you make your case to the voters in D.C.?
When I first ran for office, which was a while ago, I had been an advisory neighborhood commissioner, an elected commissioner from a neighborhood, and I ran principally on the platform that I was close to communities and understood grassroots and would be representative of them.
So you've been reelected many times because the people of D.C. support your policies and positions.
Correct.
I ask this because at the heart of today's hearing is a resolution introduced by Republican lawmakers that clearly interferes with democratically approved measures. To your knowledge, has Republican Representative Andrew Clyde from Georgia, who sponsored this bill, ever knocked doors in D.C. to make the case that he understands what D.C. voters want or need?
I'm unaware of him knocking on any doors.
Mr. Allen, are you aware of the representative who's sponsoring this bill knocking doors in D.C., speaking with members of city councils, holding roundtables, doing any kind of town halls to figure out what the citizens of D.C. need?
I'm unaware of any actions like that.
I'm unaware of any too, and I actually don't think they've happened at all. I think a lot of people find it very confusing that D.C. City Council passed legislation to address an issue impacting residents. And we have a D.C. City Council where officials have been representing voters long before Mr. Clyde or I were in Congress. And I don't pretend to know any better than Mr. Clyde what local measures D.C. needs. And that's what local government is all about. Some on this panel want to undermine the bipartisan principle of home rule to score political points, and I cannot support it. It's happening in my state of Florida right now, where the governor is abusing his power to overturn and target political enemies at the local level. I don't think that's freedom. I don't think that's liberty. I don't think it was the principles this country was founded on, and it's part of the reason why I am very against this measure. It's harmful to what's going across the country. This is not what needs to be happening right now in terms of D.C. We need to be talking about statehood, which is something that the residents of D.C. actually want, not this type of legislation.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Frost. Are we here? There we are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we can all agree that child trafficking of any kind is completely unacceptable, and the reports about the child trafficking victim in Florida City, Florida, the state I'm from, is truly heartbreaking. And I'm appalled by yesterday's report in the New York Times that shows the administration's lack of action when it knew about these violations as far as child labor laws are concerned. One child is too many. And as someone who comes from an immigrant family, as someone who believes that our policy should be informed by love and compassion, this is something that I hope the administration will work on to ensure it's not a problem in the future, and to ensure that no child that has sought refuge in America is being mistreated, and that we have a fully well-funded immigration system that's rooted in that love and compassion. These values are what drive my immigration policy, and unfortunately, I see that missing from a lot of the Republican politicians on this committee, in this body, and in my home state of Florida. And I just have to bring up the fact that right now, in my state, Governor DeSantis and his buddies in the State House are moving forward a bill, HB 1617, that would make it a third-degree felony punishable by 5 years in prison to knowingly transport someone who is undocumented. And I have to just call out the hypocrisy right now. And again, I think that the administration's failure on protecting these children is appalling, and it needs to be fixed. But at the same time, we see this hypocrisy and this sudden caring about undocumented children and caring about unaccompanied minors. And my question for you is this: a bill like this that is being supported by the Republican Party in Florida that makes it a third-degree felony to transport an undocumented person, how would that impact your work in being able to place an unaccompanied child in a safe environment?
Thank you, Congressman. Our legal authorities, as provided by Congress, require us to provide for the safety and well-being of children in our care and to release them without undue delay to a vetted sponsor. The bill that you're speaking of, which I can't get into House bills, that's out of my my authority as the ORR director, but what I can say is that these measures make our job more difficult. And when you speak of the compassion of caring for children, I can assure you hundreds of staff across this country, this is their mission. They personally believe in what we are doing, and they are doing everything within the authorities and resources provided to provide good care for these children and to release them to appropriately vetted sponsors.
Thank you. And I think it just shows that we have this problem we're seeing right now that's showcased here on the committee, where we have a party that wants to take this problem that is a problem that needs to be fixed, using it for political points rather than actually wanting to fix the problem. And that's why I point out this bill in my home state of Florida that will continue to make conditions unsafe for unaccompanied children in the state of Florida. And we see legislation like this across the country. I mean, tomorrow, the House Judiciary Committee is marking up a 137-page Republican immigration bill that will continue to cause harm to our immigration system. One section of this bill is going to codify the Trump administration mandate that OR share information about sponsors home with ICE so they can target those sponsors with arrest and threats of deportation. How would this bill and the codification of the Trump administration policy affect your ability to place children with their parents or legal guardians?
Thank you, Congressman. I think steps like that create a chilling impact on sponsors coming forward. And we know child welfare best practice is a child is best placed with their family in a community, not a congregate care setting.
And how might arresting and threatening folks who come forward to sponsor a child affect the availability of good sponsors?
Once again, Congressman, our job is to release children as safely and quickly as possible. We want them released to their parent, to their legal guardian, to their aunts, to their uncles, or other sponsors as appropriate.
Thank you. You know, politicians might talk about their desire to help protect children, but every time that they've had the opportunity, especially my Republican colleagues in Congress, to pursue policies that would help the most vulnerable, we see them use it to score political points as well. Again, the administration's failure to protect these specific children, I read the New York Times probe and article, is alarming. But at the same time, I don't for 1 second buy the lie that Republicans on this committee in Congress give a damn about actually fixing the problem. Thank you. I yield back.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today because the American people know that their right to abortion care is under attack. As I speak right now across the street, the Supreme Court of the United States is getting ready to rule on whether or not to keep a ban and restrictions on an abortion pill that has been around for decades and has safely helped millions when they needed it the most. In my home state of Florida, our wannabe president of a governor signed a 6-week abortion ban into law that effectively means that people who have been raped, who are the victims of incest, and who are experiencing life-threatening pregnancies are going to be denied the care that they need and will be forced to give birth. It's barbaric and disgusting. That isn't liberty. That isn't freedom. Being able to make a decision about your future and your body, that's freedom. Having control over your own reproductive care, that's freedom. Having a choice, that's freedom. And that's what we need to fight for. Freedom and liberty for all of our people, not ripping away one of their most sacred human rights. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman?
After all these years, I would like to yield to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Maxwell Frost.
Thank you, Congresswoman Ramirez. I'm here today because I am ecstatic that we have a president who had chosen to lead with love and compassion when it comes to other humans in this country. And thank you to President Biden for having the heart and the courage to do what his predecessor never did, show respect and dignity to dreamers and DACA recipients who came to the United States through no choice of their own and are fully fledged Americans in every single way but one, on paper. The Biden administration's move to expand health care coverage to DACA recipients is bold and historic and follows Democrats' commitment to helping immigrant communities that have spent their lives living in the shadows of this country. And there are over 500,000 dreamers in the United States who were extended a literal lifeline through the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, and over 20,000 DACA recipients who call my home state of Florida their home. And through DACA has been a wonderful beacon of hope for so many. And through his action, President Biden has acknowledged that more can be done to help this vulnerable community. For years now, DACA recipients have been living with a weight on their shoulders, constantly worried about losing their jobs means the end of being able to afford affordable care, or being able to afford care, forcing them to stay in working environments that perhaps mistreat them, backed into a corner where they have to decide between getting to see a doctor or having to push through the pain and the illness. And let me be clear, no one should have to make that decision between access to medical care or putting food on the table or having a roof over their head. Healthcare in this country is and should be a human right for all people by virtue of being alive. But that's a scenario that's all too familiar with DACA recipients. I've read stories of young people from my hometown of Central Florida who have gotten health care for the first time in their lives, only then to lose that care because of a layoff or job cuts. I'm hard-pressed to find a working person or working family that can afford to pay $500 or more a month for health insurance. And I've always said that if you love somebody, you want them to have health care. You want them to have a good-paying job that treats them fairly. If you love somebody, you want them to succeed. You want them to thrive. If you love somebody, you want them to be healthy. You want them to be able to see a doctor or a medical professional because if, God forbid, they could become sick. See, dreamers are people. DACA recipients are people. Immigrants are people. And they deserve to be able to get their care through Medicaid and the ACA just like anybody else in this country. We still have so much work left to do to ensure that we actually create a compassionate, humane immigration system that offers a real pathway to citizenship for the hundreds of thousands of dreamers and DACA recipients who call Florida home and this country home. But this action is a beacon of hope. And to the dreamers across the country that are listening right now, hear me when we say we won't stop fighting, not just for you, but with you. Home is here. Healthcare is a human right. And thank you to all the organizers, young people, advocacy groups, and allies across the country who have spent years fighting for this very moment. Let's get to work and continue to provide for all people. Thank you. I yield back to Congresswoman Ramirez. Mr. Speaker, I rise today as a proud adoptee, a son with two loving parents who provided me with all the love and support a child could ever ask for. But yet, I heard in this chamber a few days ago that someone saying my parents aren't real parents. Let me be clear, I am their child, they are my parents, and for bigoted, closed-minded reason, certain folks have decided that people who adopt their children are lesser than. But make no mistake, whether you adopted your child, had biological children, or found your chosen family in some other way, you are a parent. And because I haven't seen any of my Republican colleagues in this chamber condemn these disgusting comments, I hope that they don't also agree with it. Because I won't allow anyone in this chamber to disrespect my family or yours. And directly to the people who have opened up their hearts and homes to children ready for their embrace, don't let anyone ever diminish who you are. You are real parents, a parent and nothing less. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair would remind.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In a true democracy, the people hold the power, and it is up to the people in their local communities to come together and make laws that fit their everyday reality. And what I'm describing is local control, and local control is the bedrock of liberty. And naturally, when I see outright attacks on local governments for implementing policies that their constituents want, need, and voted for, I see that as an attack not just on the elected officials, but on the constituents of that area. And so there are Republican lawmakers in this chamber, on this committee, that are determined to undermine local government when the policies don't serve them. This is very true and something that I recognize all the time in my district of Central Florida, that is constantly under attack by the Florida State Legislature and Governor Ron DeSantis. And so I know all about Republican lawmakers that have this same agenda, using fear, intimidation, and ultimately trying to use their action to stifle local government and to stifle democracy. Republican lawmakers want to talk about public safety with a straight face while refusing to do anything about gun violence in this country. Republicans want to talk with a straight face about protecting students in schools without doing anything to change the fact that the leading cause of death in this country for a kid is to be shot to death. Ron DeSantis then failed to secure funds to implement laws that Floridians want, like red flag laws and extreme risk protection orders, because of a complete disregard of what local communities want and because of sheer incompetence. The intent of the D.C. Home Rule Act was to, quote, grant the inhabitants of the District of Columbia powers of self-government. Not only that, but D.C. has an elected chief executive, the mayor, and an elected legislature, the D.C. City Council. And if D.C. residents do not like how their elected representatives govern, guess what? They can vote them out of office. Mayor Bowser, you have served on both the D.C. Council and as mayor. How many times were you elected to the council, and how many times have you been elected as mayor?
I was elected 3 times. I served almost 8 years as a council member, and I'm starting my 9th year as mayor, 3 times.
The United States Congress has 535 voting members. D.C. residents cannot vote for a single one of those voting members out of office. In 1995, then Republican Speaker Newt Gingrich said the following about D.C. We should not interfere directly with home rule. Those of us who visit and who come here only for the purpose of representing our communities do not have the knowledge and do not have the right to micromanage the daily lives of the people of this city. It is interesting and wild how times can change for a party. Mayor Bowser, do congressional Republicans have more knowledge about D.C. than you and the members of the D.C. City Council?
No.
Mayor Bowser, have any Republicans on this committee gone out and knocked doors with you in the community to learn about Washington, D.C.?
No.
Are you aware of any Republicans on this committee that have gone to knock doors with any members of the City Council to learn more about Washington, D.C.?
I'm not aware.
Are you aware of any Republicans on this committee that have gone to any town halls with you or any roundtables to learn about the District of Columbia?
No.
The fact that they pretend that they know how to govern D.C. better than y'all is patronizing. And as I've said before, I don't agree with every local policy out there, but I respect certain decisions made under home rule. And there are Republicans here so preoccupied with trying to govern D.C., it makes you wonder who they're really trying to represent. I urge my colleagues to support statehood for the nearly 700,000 D.C. residents. I thank you all for your time, and I apologize that you have to waste your time at a hearing like this, especially on your daughter's birthday. We say happy birthday to your daughter, and I yield back.
Well, would you yield to me, Mr. Frost?
Yes, I yield to Mr.
I
Conlon.
thank my...
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this resolution. And I want to say something. My Republican colleagues are pushing a narrative that student debt relief is unfair. And to my colleagues, I agree with you. I agree that what's going on is unfair. Folks who paid off their debt, the fact that they had to have it in the first place is unfair. The fact that students still have to take out crushing student debt just to get a college education, that is unfair. And if we legislated using the logic that you bring to this issue here today, women and black folks wouldn't have the right to vote because it would be unfair to those who never got to vote before them. See, if we legislated using your logic, that because there was an injustice, we can't fix it because it's unfair to those who never had it fixed, means we would never progress on any issue in this country. Why do you bring that bigoted logic to this issue as it relates to students, but not any other issue.
Demand his words
What
be taken
we know,
down.
The gentleman will suspend.
You said your bigoted logic.
Take a seat. The clerk will report the words. The offending words are withdrawn. The gentleman will proceed in order.
if we used this logic on every single issue, we would never have progress on anything. And the truth of the matter is that young people and people don't have student debt because we live beyond our means. We have student debt because we've been denied the means to live. And it's important to understand that Congress needs to help fix this damaged economy, which gets more unequal and unequitable every single day. This bill today is not delivering that help. It's making things worse. And to people watching at home, to young people, to people with student debt, just know that the Republican Party here, my colleagues in this chamber, are fighting to take away the relief that you need and that you deserve. This is about fairness, and true fairness is ensuring that everyone has equitable opportunity. 20 million.
That objection, gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today because after weeks of pointing fingers on the debt ceiling negotiations, House Republicans have finally shown their true colors. It's Republican leadership that controls this chamber. It's Speaker McCarthy who controls the floor. Yet instead of working overtime to make sure that we don't default on our nation's debt, send the economy into a tailspin, and stop the benefits of millions of Americans, members of Congress are going home this weekend. And the interesting thing is many of these folks, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, are the same people that clowned me on Twitter for not having the best credit after my campaign and being denied an apartment here in D.C. Imagine the hypocrisy of poor shaming working people for trying to pay off their debts and then turn around and refuse to pay the country's debt to pay for the tax cuts for billionaires. It's distasteful, it's disgraceful, and we have to do better. I yield back.
Mr. Frost.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kufari, the Office of Personnel Management's Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey is a tool for federal agency employees to provide feedback on how engaged they are in their work. When people are engaged at work, they're more effective at their jobs, they perform the work more efficiently, and part of a principal's job is keeping their team engaged. In other words, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Surveys can reveal what leadership techniques are working for agency executives and which ones are not. In fact, Mr. Kufari, you regularly tout your office's Federal Employee Viewpoint S-score since you've taken over as Inspector General. In May 2022, in a letter to this committee, you highlighted portions of your office's survey data from 2020 and 2021 that apparently show improvement in employee engagement. And in an email you sent to all your staff in December 2022 that I have here, you again highlighted improvements in your agency's 2022 survey data. Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an email between Inspector General Kufari and his office lauding the importance of Federal Employee Viewpoint survey scores.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Kufari, do you agree that the Federal Employee Viewpoint survey data are important indicators for how an agency is performing?
Yes.
That's right. And in the past, you have said that they document progress. However, in the most recent survey data shows that a majority of the people in your office do not believe that their senior leadership maintains high standards of honesty and integrity. 66% of your employees. Mr. Kufari, are you a senior leader?
Yes.
Mr. Kufari, are you aware that nearly half of the employees in the Office of Inspection and Evaluations fear retaliation if they disclose suspected violation of laws, rules, or regulation?
You're asking if I'm aware of it?
Are you aware of that? Are you aware of the fact that 40% compared to 43% who don't?
No, sir.
Yes, that's a reality through the survey that you tout. Mr. Kufari, how about the fact, do you know about the fact that less than half of your staff in the Office of Counsel feel like they can safely disclose suspected wrongdoing?
Yes.
You are aware of that. Only 45% feel like they can disclose that. I find this incredibly alarming, especially when coupled with the fact that you've run away from any efforts to conduct oversight in your office, using taxpayer money, $1.4 million, to contract a law firm to run away from accountability on your part. And you know, I've seen weak leaders run from accountability before. In my home state of Florida right now, Governor Ron DeSantis is saddling taxpayers with billions in legal fees to defend his unlawful policies with his intimidation, his removal of dissenting officials. He's taking major losses on the backs of taxpayers because private sector officials called out his disastrous agenda. And the Florida legislature has approved a whole new budget to pay for all of his legal losses. But he doesn't want to answer for that. And I admit, at this point, many of us realize that DeSantis gets an F in accountability. However, inspectors general are meant to serve as a safe haven for whistleblowers. How is a whistleblower supposed to trust your office when members of your own staff don't even feel safe to report wrongdoing themselves? I yield to Mr. Ivey.
Yields back her time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Frost, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud to represent Central Florida here in the United States Congress. Central Florida is home to Orlando, one of the top tourist destinations in the entire country. The closest passport agency to Orlando, Florida is actually in Miami. It's about 235 miles away, about a 4-hour drive, an expensive plane ticket or train ticket to get there. The Miami Passport Agency is only open Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. until 2 p.m. I'm concerned about the people who work Monday through Friday, the working class people who have a hard time taking off to go travel 4 hours to Miami for their passport applications. Assistant Secretary Bitter, I understand the Miami Passport Agency staff are working extremely hard under the constraints that they have and the hours that they're open. The problem for my constituents is it's not always possible to take time off to get down there. Are there any solutions that come to mind on ways that we can address this problem?
Yes, thank you so much for the question, Congressman. We have 7,000 acceptance agencies across the United States where people can apply in person. For renewals, of course, people can send them in by mail. When we do our geographic surveys, we find that 95% of our customers live within 25 miles of an acceptance agency, and 90% of Americans live within a 5-hour drive of a counter. What we're aiming to do, of course, is to ensure that our service standards are widely publicized so people can plan their trips and they don't have to go to a passport agency, and also to invest in technology so people can have more access to the ability to apply from their own homes. We would love to work with you if there are more opportunities to increase the number of acceptance facilities so people can apply in person in your district. We would love to work with you on that.
Okay, perfect. I'd love to work with you on that as well. Assistant Secretary Bitter, yesterday I sent a letter to Deputy Assistant Secretary Arndt asking if the Department of State would consider accepting appointments on Saturday at that office. Would you be able to commit to taking a look at that letter and exploring that option, just so that way working families who have a hard time getting there during the weekday have an opportunity to go to a counter and see somebody?
Certainly, and in fact, our counters across the network each of them have opened some weekend hours, but I would love to look at that letter, and we'll certainly work with you on that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to committing to taking a look at the letter, looking at how we can accommodate working families on a Saturday, and also looking at how we can probably get a counter in Florida's 10th Congressional District. My constituents have family reunions, business trips, honeymoons to get to, and so we just want to make sure we're doing everything we can to advocate for them. I was just this morning rallying with AFGE, with a lot of our workers. One of my colleagues brought this up earlier, but the Social Security Administration currently ranks as one of the worst federal workplaces. Mr. Poyce, what's being done to support our government employees who are currently working under some pretty severe constraints in terms of capacity?
So thanks for that question. So, again, staffing is really the #1 reason that our employees are reporting they feel overworked. So again, with the fiscal year 2023 appropriation that we've received, again, we are grateful for the increase we received over fiscal year 2022. We've implemented a pretty aggressive hiring plan for this year. I'd already mentioned that we reported about 2,000 net gains so far this fiscal year. So kind of a help is on the way for those employees out there on our front lines who are working day in and day out for us. So I think that's the biggest challenge that we see is they need staff. They need the additional support in their offices next to them.
For the next fiscal year, Social Security Administration requests additional funding to improve customer service in field offices and hotlines, address processing center backlogs, and reduce the disability claims backlog. I know you've been expressing that capacity is really the main root cause of a lot of the problems we're seeing. Which federal body is in charge of funding the Social Security Administration?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Which federal body is in charge of funding the Social Security Administration? Who approves your budget?
Oh, Congress.
United States Congress. What percentage of the funding your agency requested has actually been authorized?
So for like 14 of the last 20 years, we've not received the president's budget level of requested funding. So again, we've been severely underfunded for multiple years.
Yes. Well, there you have it. I mean, the reason why disability claims are slower than molasses is not, just a fact of life. It's because Republicans in Congress repeatedly have chosen to defund the Social Security and the Social Security Administration. What was the effect of telework during the pandemic?
So really, telework allowed our operations to continue during the pandemic. When our service transitioned to mostly a telephone-based service, again, during the early parts of the pandemic, again, our offices never fully closed to the public. They were limited to appointments only to protect both our employees and the visiting public, who often, met some of those vulnerability criteria with the pandemic. So really, telework allowed us to continue our operations. And now that we've fully re-entered back in March of 2022, again, we do have telework still within the agency itself. It's mostly driven by a business decision. Managers decide who is telework eligible and who is not telework eligible, and also have the flexibility to recall or suspend telework in, say, our field offices if there's an expected high demand day or something like that.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much.
I recognize Mr. Frost from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, thank you so much for your service working at the IRS. Very important work. Let's get right into it. Mr. Shapley, you're blowing the whistle today because you feel like the Department of Justice provided preferential treatment to Hunter Biden. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes or no? That's correct. And you believe that Hunter Biden received that preferential treatment because his father is the Democratic President, Joe Biden. Is that correct?
I can't conclude why he's receiving the preferential treatment, but that is one conclusion you can come to.
Yeah, I mean, it's evident in your deposition that you believe that. Mr. Ziegler, did any of your supervisors explicitly tell you you're not allowed to investigate Hunter Biden because he's the president's son, yes or no?
I was never told that.
You were never told that, thank you. I mean, I know we're in your deposition. Did you suggest that there's some larger conspiracy at play here, which is what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would have us believe, that there's a two-tier justice system that privileges Democrats over Republicans. And that's what my colleagues are doing. They're using you and using your story and using your work to make this argument for themselves. And since January 6th, these Republicans and Trump have complained about a two-tiered justice system, co-opting the language of the decades-long civil rights movement for Black lives and Black freedom, a movement that they actually are actively looking to eliminate. There is a two-tiered justice system, but it's not about Democrats versus Republicans. This language, two-tiered justice system, has a real history. It has a real history of Emmett Till. It has a real history with Breonna Taylor. It has a real history with George Floyd, the Central Park Five, Derek D. as a young man who was just an unarmed young man who was just killed in Central Florida not but a week ago. And it has a real history with the Groveland Four Black boys from Central Florida who were falsely accused of kidnapping and sexually assaulting a white woman when they pulled over to help her when the car was broken. The fourth boy, who isn't pictured here, Ernest Thomas, wasn't apprehended initially. He was actually shot to death in his sleep. A 100-person mob wanted to get their hands on the remaining 3 black boys and couldn't, and so they took it out on the predominantly black town, shooting residents, looting, setting fire to their homes. Charles Greenlee was sentenced to prison for life. He was 16 years old. Now, just a quick trigger warning here for Black death and trauma, but it's an important story to tell when we talk about the two-tier justice system. Because on the way back from the courthouse, the sheriff took it upon himself to shoot the 2 remaining individuals, Walter Irvin and Samuel Shepard. Walter Irvin actually ended up living because when he was shot, he played dead. But the other one was shot, killed, Samuel Shepard. They were both handcuffed, as you can see in the photo, and were shot to death. They all died in either prison or on parole as convicted criminals. And in 2021, 72 years later, a judge exonerated them and the trial was considered a fraud. In closing, there is a two-tier justice system. It does exist, but it's not what my Republican colleagues want to say it is, using your story for that. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's black, brown, and poor people versus everyone else. And I won't accept when Republican politicians look to appropriate the language of the movement for black lives and civil rights to fit a political agenda to defend Donald Trump. This is the two-tier justice system. This is the two-tier justice system. And so we have to continue to fight for a world where this doesn't happen. This case about Hunter Biden is a case closed. And, you know, I'll close with a question with the chairman. Considering the, quote, falsehoods, abuses, and misrepresentations of sensitive information that you've presented here, when we're done with this made-up investigation, are you expecting to be censured by the House? The reason I ask is because it's in line with the logic and actions of the Republican Party here in the 118th Congress. Thank you. And I yield,
With the gentleman, yep.
I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you very kindly.
In 22, NASA announced that it was commissioning an independent study team to examine UAPs. The NASA team is comprised of scientists across different fields, as well as former astronauts and pilots. In May, the independent study team held that its first public meeting, which included the perspectives from NASA senior leaders, as well as perspectives from the Department of Defense and intelligence agencies. The NASA study team is also expected to release its first report pretty soon, and I think it's safe to say that we all eagerly await its results. Mr. Graves, how might NASA's research influence the commercial industry regarding safety in UAP?
I think NASA has a big role to play as far as commercial aviation safety, and it's one of their original charges as an organization. One of the recommendations that have been put forward is to utilize their existing aviation safety reporting system to serve as a short-term fill and trusted platform for pilots that want to report on UAP. It also has built-in analytics capability and is funded by Congress.
Gotcha. And also, Mr. Graves, are there any other industries that may be influenced by the NASA research on UAPs? And if so, how so?
Well, I think there is a large swath of commercial capabilities that could be brought to bear on this topic, from space-based or ground-based sensor systems that are available open source or through commercial marketplaces. And I think NASA's work, as they work to identify and highlight specific parameters that can be found, we can take that information and promulgate this through the public sector so that we can have a more open conversation about what we're seeing.
You know, in 2020, the Department of Defense released several videos of UAPs, including Mr. Freyer's experience, U.S. Navy pilots that recorded footage. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a preliminary report on UAP events. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson stated that NASA would begin to investigate these events. In fact, I sit on Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and when we were doing a hearing with the NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, I asked, you know, why NASA needed to be fully funded, and there were many great reasons, but one of them was actually had to do with UAPs. He actually mentioned, you know, is there life out there? I don't know. And so either way, these actions ultimately led NASA to assemble the independent study team that I mentioned earlier. Also in 2021, Harvard University stood up the Galileo project to research and examine the origins of UAP. So it seems like both, you know, from NASA and in the higher education community, because of the work that y'all have done and people standing up, you know, I think we're seeing some of that stigma slowly going away. Mr. Freyer, do you believe that military pilots feeling empowered to share their UAP experiences has directly impacted the scientific community's research goals on this topic?
I would say yes. I would say that, you know, starting in 2017, when it actually came out, it took that stigma away. I mean, I've talked to multiple senators who said prior to that, if you'd have mentioned UAP, you'd have been laughed off the hill. And now we're sitting here today for a public testimony on what's actually going on. You know, I'm hoping that this curve will be more of an exponential and we'll get more and more transparent to the level that we can.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. I couldn't imagine, you know, I'm not a pilot, but I used to fly gliders in Civil Air Patrol. Huh? Yeah.
Pilot?
I mean, you know. And so either way, I mean, I couldn't imagine, you know, being in the glider and seeing something and then not feeling like I had the agency to talk about it. Mr. Graves, can you discuss the importance of seeking scientists to sit on your advisory board?
Absolutely. I think ultimately this is going to be a scientific problem. And not only that, it's also an engineering problem. I've been working with the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics to help them stand up a UAP integration committee to help integrate their engineering prowess into this problem. And so, yes, very much, I think this is an engineering and scientific problem as much as a national security problem.
And how might Congress help to facilitate partnerships between the scientific community and the UAP focus groups within government?
Well, I think one of the things they can do is to have these types of hearings to communicate to the public that this is a topic of interest. I think that there is a pseudo-market, if you will, of interested capabilities and talent that want to approach this topic, and we're seeing that start to grow now. So I think continued conversation, reduction of stigma is going to allow that to flourish and allow answers to help generate themselves.
100%. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your work. I think it's important that we keep our top scientific minds focused on this issue and look for ways to increase collaboration. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Malevolence that has to be taken into account. And I think we're going to have to I know Congressman Dan Crenshaw is involved with this select committee on dealing with the cartels, but when you have over 100,000 people dying, and that's probably underreported by 10–15% because so many families don't want it on the death certificate how their family member died. I think we're going to have to reevaluate how we address this, and it needs to be a bipartisan effort. And I thank you for being here. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Frost from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Gupta, for being here. The Office of National Drug Control Policy is responsible for coordinating the United States drug control policy response. This includes policies addressing the flow of harmful drugs into the country, but also includes supporting our neighbors who are directly impacted by substance use disorder. And also to clarify, the ONDCP has been around since 1989. Once again, the ONDCP has been around since 1989. It was reauthorized in 2018. So it was not founded in 2018, it was in 1989. Each year in Florida, around 750,000 people misuse prescription pain relievers, and 165,000 live with an opioid use disorder. And it gets worse. In America, approximately 85% of the prison population has an active substance use disorder or were incarcerated in connection with drugs or drug use. Forced withdrawal in prison can be deadly. Doctor, how has your office supported the expansion of substance use treatment for incarcerated folks?
Thank you, Congressman, for that important question. The fact is today that any given day there's 2 million Americans incarcerated. 60 to 80% of them are incarcerated because of either drug use or drug-related crime. And when they are released, they're up to 120 times more likely to die from overdose or be reincarcerated. It is so critical becomes to get people the help they need, to get them treatment, so when they come out, that not only 85% less likely to die, but actually go back and assimilate in the community and be contributing members to the community. So we are both working within the Federal Bureau of Prisons to expand treatment, so anyone who wants treatment is offered treatment. We're also providing Medicaid waivers to states. 15 states have already applied for the waivers to get treatment available for 90 days before release. 2 have been approved, including California and Washington, which I believe was just approved last week.
Okay, thank you. And you brought this up. It's not just during incarceration. The first 2 weeks someone is out of jail, they are 129 times more likely to overdose.
Congressman, here's the problem. We have 18 to 42 years old. Number 1 cause of death today in America, this is working age population, is overdose. And these folks are being released and they're dying. I look at this also from an economic prosperity and a future for a country standpoint. And this is what and this is not a 1 year or 2 year project. This is something we will continue to see results into the future.
Has your office developed recommendations on dealing with overdose in terms of reentry?
Yes, Congressman, we have developed a state model law for prisons and jails to look at how to measure, because we want to make sure the taxpayer dollars are being appropriately used to measure what works, what doesn't work as well, and we'll be happy to share.
I also want to hear what you have to say about the CMS 1115 waiver. Can you explain for people what that is and why it's so important?
Yes, Congressman. As I mentioned, the numbers do not lie. We have too many Americans dying. that are being released back into the community because their threshold goes down and they go back and they end up dying, or worse, in being incarcerated. The 1115 waiver allows states to apply for the ability to treat people for 90 days before they are released. And then the most important piece of this is connecting. Oftentimes when people are released, they're lost in the community. Next time they know, either they're in prison or they're dead. This connection, transition of care is so important that this waiver allows. It's literally life-saving and life-changing for these individuals.
And as I understand it, my home state of Florida is not yet among the states making use of the waiver. Is that correct?
My understanding as well.
In 2022, the National Drug Control Strategy, you outlined specific goals and field performance goals for 2025. How confident are you that if given that amount of resources needed, that you can hit those targets that you've set for yourself?
These are goals that we've outlined of saving 165,000 American lives by 2025 are doable. But just
Chair now recognize Mr. Frost from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. An impeachment inquiry is a grave undertaking that is supposed to be in response to evidence of a crime. Mr. Chairman, you have questions. Many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in this hearing have questions, but questions are not the basis for an impeachment. Evidence is. Mr. Turley, on September 1st, Speaker Kevin McCarthy said that he would not launch a fake impeachment inquiry, a sham impeachment inquiry. But then on September 12th, just 12 days later, he completely changed his mind. My question is why? In those 12 days, did hard evidence appear that clearly and directly links the President of the United States, Joe Biden, to a crime?
I can't answer as to what was it that pushed the Speaker to make the decision. The courts have said you don't have to have that vote on the floor. I think it is a best practice.
But I'm very interested in those 12 days. And we know you're not a fact witness and you're talking about things that are already public. But is there anything that came up in those 12 days that linked the President of the United States to a crime? Yes or no?
I don't have any recollection of those 12 days.
Yeah, nothing. I can tell you it's nothing. And we've heard even from you that this is why we have this impeachment inquiry. But let's be clear, this inquiry has been going on since the day we got here. Since the day I was sworn in at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, this impeachment inquiry started. Let's pull back the curtain on what's really going on. There's no evidence of crime, only desperation and political pressure. This is what's going on. The far right called for the sham impeachment hearing with no evidence at the beginning of this year when we first got started. This impeachment inquiry has been going on. This is not the first hearing we've had in relation to this. On September 1st, the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, says, no, we're not going to do that. We don't have the evidence. We don't have the votes for it to pass on the House floor. We're not going to do it. A good decision, in my opinion. But then just 12 days later, 12 precious days later, something happens. I'm not sure what, but something happens because then the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, comes out and says, yes, we will do an impeachment inquiry. So what happened between these 12 days? It's very simple. 3 threats from members of his own caucus at the direction of former President Donald Trump changed his mind. Number one, the threat to force a vote on impeachment, which would lose on the House floor and be another embarrassment in the long list of embarrassments this Congress for the Speaker of the House. Number two, they would threat to shut down the government, something that will happen in just 2 days. And number three, and this is the one that really got to him, they said, you about to lose your job. And they said, we will remove you as Speaker from the House. And that scared him so much that Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House of the United States of Representatives, third in line of the presidency, completely caved due to the threats of people within his own caucus. This fake impeachment is based on desperate political calculation, not any evidence. And Mr. Chairman, you say this hearing is to establish the basis for this fake sham impeachment hearing, but these witnesses are not giving us any basis or giving us any evidence or giving us any solutions.
They are giving us several times.
I reclaim my time.
I have to stop because that's not a true statement.
I reclaim my time. These witnesses are not giving any answers. They're just asking more questions. We have one witness who has a lot of questions, Ms. O'Connor. Dubinsky, one witness who knows something about accounting but has no real involvement in what's going on. And Mr. Turley stopping here on his way to his next Fox News hit. This is not a serious inquiry. And impeachment is something that's very serious. And we have to ensure that we focus on the wants and needs of the American people. This is all for nothing. Half the crowd is left. There's no line outside. The goal here to distract from the government shutdown is not going to work. And to the Speaker, I have to say, you're being played by these extremists and Donald Trump. It's costing us our economy. And this entire fake impeachment inquiry isn't about the United States. It's about Hunter Biden. And the only thing the president can be guilty of here is being a father. I yield back to the ranking member.
Chair now recognize Mr. Turner from.
Sorry, I yield to the vice ranking member.
The gentleman from Florida yielded back. Chair
said he yielded back to the vice ranking member.
I yielded to the vice ranking member.
Thank you, and I'll claim some of that extra time back as well. You know, much of the Republican case and evidence has relied on words from Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden said this, Hunter Biden said that, therefore, case closed, there's something here. Professor Gerhardt, we know, I believe it's wide knowledge with the public, that Hunter Biden sadly was dealing with substance misuse disorder, correct?
Correct.
He's been under indictment, correct?
Correct.
Is this a reliable witness that you would deem?
Probably not.
In your assessment?
Gentle's ladies, time's
Thank you very much.
Chair now recognizes
Chairman,
Mr. Armstrong. You seek recognition.
Unanimous consent.
Hey, Kevin McCarthy! Hey, Kevin McCarthy! Don't shut us down! Don't shut us down! Hey, Kevin McCarthy! Hey, Kevin McCarthy! Green New Deal now! Green New Deal now! Woo! I made that on the walk over here, just saying. Good afternoon, I'm Congressman Maxwell Frost, proudly representing Central Florida in the United States Congress. Also proud son of a public school educator who just retired after 37 years. And I want to thank Congressman Bowman and Senator Markey for their leadership on giving the Green New Deal for public schools and for never giving up in the fight for the kind of climate solutions that we need. I also want to thank the Sunrise Movement and all the other organizations, organizers, and advocates here today. I'm proud to be a champion and co-sponsor of the Green New Deal for public health as well, because it's no secret that the same right-wing extremists who are shutting down our government this week are directly responsible for some of the worst climate policies and continuous attacks on our communities. And I'll tell you, this is very personal for me. I come from the state of Florida, which is a frontline state in this battle. Just last year, Hurricane Ian, a hurricane that was one of the most devastating hurricanes we've seen in a while, because our ocean is at the temperature of a hot tub. The temperature of a hot tub. The hurricanes are lasting longer and they're worse. And that hurricane literally decimated cities in my state. But we have a governor that wants to reject any kind of federal help or any kind of policies to ensure that our people are safe. Boom! Not just that, but these programs are being cut left and right. And to make matters worse, our schools are crumbling. Our public schools are crumbling, with more than half of all public schools needing at least one major facility repair, including school infrastructure, lighting, ventilation, AC, heating, accessibility, and storm management. These problems disproportionately impact Black, brown, Indigenous, and poor communities. And I love the Green New Deal for public schools for many different reasons, but the top one is that it views these issues holistically. Because when the oppression is connected, the organizing and solutions must also be connected. And I'll tell you, earlier this month, schools in the Midwest and the Northeast had to close because of extreme heat. In Florida, climate change has been directly responsible for some of the worst hurricane seasons on record. That means that kids are out of school every time a strong storm emerges, but even worse, those kids are at risk of losing their houses, losing their loved ones, and losing their lives. How do we expect students to learn? How do we expect students to feel good about being in school under these conditions? We deserve safe schools. We deserve clean and safe communities. We deserve a climate solution and not a climate crisis. And let's be clear, because forever in the movement, it's coming. It's here. The climate crisis is here. People are dying now. This problem is happening now. But the good news is that we can still do something to stop. the worst impacts of this. And shame on us if we don't. The Green New Deal for public schools is about the present and the future of our country, not just our country, but about humanity. This should not be a partisan issue. This should be clear. The climate crisis isn't coming, it's here. And while many in the halls of Congress want to talk about it costs too much, let's be clear. The cost of not doing anything is far greater than the cost of taking bold action now. And in these halls, the definition of cost is different for the people in these halls than the rest of our country. Because for them, cost is just dollar and cents. But for us, cost is human lives. So together we'll use every tool at our disposal. Protest, voting, mutual aid, direct action, running for office, bridging the gap between cooling consciousness and creating art to build the better world that we deserve. I believe in a Green New Deal for public schools because I believe in humanity. So, thank y'all so much. And again, hey, Kevin McCarthy! Hey, Kevin McCarthy! Don't shut us down! Don't shut us down! Hey, Kevin McCarthy! Hey, Kevin McCarthy! And I said Green New Deal now! Woo! Green New Deal now! Woo!
The distinguished gentleman from Wisconsin yields back his time. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Frost, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Republicans have spent more than a decade working to kneecap the IRS through funding cut after funding cut. At the same time, Congress has tasked the agency with enforcing one of the most complex tax codes in the world on a growing population with increasing wealth inequality. The IRS has struggled for years to provide the level of service taxpayers deserve, whether that was processing people's tax refunds in a timely manner, performing audits against high-risk individuals, or enforcing tax law against fraudsters and those who made false business statements in order to get loans. The agency struggles with customer service in several ways, but two that I'm especially concerned about are the old IT systems that can't digitize IRS forms, and then the IT modernization blunders. Ms. Lucas-Judy, earlier this year, the Government Accountability Office, GAO, found that the IRS still uses massively outdated IT systems. How do these systems impact the taxpayers?
Well, their legacy IT systems are at the heart of a lot of IRS operations on customer service side, on returns processing and accounts management, as well as enforcement. And so it's very important, and that also has an effect on accuracy and on speed of processing. So it's very important that IRS be able to implement its plans and prioritize the different modernization initiatives that it has in place, and that it be clear about the goals and the timelines and progress.
So it seems like it also contributes to security risks, unmet mission needs, and staffing issues, and increased costs, correct?
Correct.
You know, in May, one of my constituents reached out because she had waited for more than 6 months for her tax return, which she desperately needed to pay rent. She was told that it would be 120 days, and then it was 60 days, and then she had to wait for a letter, and then she got the letter, and the letter said she'd have to wait for a year. The IRS has operated with more than 600 legacy systems, including the individual master file, a 60-year-old system. And the software is written in a coding language that they don't even teach in schools anymore. This is one of the most central systems for tax processing. The IRS has set a goal to retire the individual master file between 2027 and 2029. Mr. Commissioner, what is the importance of the IRS meeting this retirement goal for that system, and what does the IRS have does the IRS have the funding it needs to stay on track with that really important goal?
Yeah, I'm really glad. It's such an essential part of what I've been talking about. I've been mentioning, like, we're laying the bricks of a foundation to improve customer service. That individual master file is kind of the engine. It's the infrastructure. So the example I often give is if you left here and went to the ATM machine and took out money, by the time you got home and logged onto your online bank account, it already knows you took money out. But that's not true in the IRS. It takes us time to process that information and move it into an online account. And that old system that's written on COBOL can't move or communicate quickly enough with that online solution. Not only do we need to do it to move to the cloud and move to a smarter and more manageable architecture, it's also going to be more secure. It is a keystone for a lot of the efforts. And we do have some good news. The good news is in April, so after this filing season, we are going to turn on that modern system for the first time, and we're going to run it in parallel with our legacy system, work out any kinks, and hopefully get it up and running in filing season 25. So we are making progress. Do we have enough money? I'm glad you asked. We have a modernization budget, as people have pointed out. It's currently at $60 billion, and it's very, very large and very, very impactful. The issue, however, is our base budget, our annual budget to run the trains every day. And that's been underfunded and is still underfunded. And in order to run those trains, we have to borrow from the modernization budget to pay for the base budget. And as we do that, we raid the modernization budget, and then we might not have enough money. So the answer to your question is, we have enough money as long as Congress appropriates our base budget, gives us enough money to run the daily train schedules, then we have enough money to get our job done.
Mr. Commissioner, how will these efforts that we've just spoken about improve the 2024 filing season for the people of Central Florida, but also across the entire country?
Well, there's a lot, like as I said earlier, my goal is that the improvements we're making are visible and can be felt by taxpayers, because when they come to us in January to April to pay their taxes, we're making specific improvements. So we're changing things for filing season 24, for example. We're replacing old scanner and processing equipment, so we'll be scanning more and processing paper more quickly. We've made changes to the online accounts, added more functionality to the individual online accounts. We've updated and are redesigning our notices so they're easier to read, easier to follow, more plain language. We're enhancing our outreach on tax scams, all of that happening in filing season 24, and then a whole host of additional incremental improvements in filing season 25. The idea is to each year get better and better, and where I see opportunities to accelerate, I will push for acceleration. The goal is to do things for taxpayers as quickly as possible, but as safely as possible.
Thank you so much. My constituents can't, afford to wait long time to get their tax returns, and I think it's important that every member on this committee be on the same page. We can't defund the IRS. We need to modernize it. I also want to end by thanking all the hardworking federal employees at the IRS who are serving their country. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Thanks, gentleman from South.
Thank you. Mr. Frost?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Religious prosecution and violent extremism globally are very serious threats to U.S. security and human rights abroad. Today, on my line, I want to focus in and hone in on religious extremism happening here in the United States domestically, because I believe it's also a very important part of this conversation. Christian nationalism is a form of religious extremism making its way into our policies and undermining our democracy. These extremist actors are co-opting the language of Christianity and religious freedom to push an undemocratic agenda that seeks the very opposite of what they claim to do. And I want to start off by saying I'm a man of faith. I was raised Southern Baptist. I love potlucks. I was in Awana. I got the Sparky Award. I was in youth band for about 10 years. This is a huge part of my life and part of the reason why I'm so passionate about it. As a man of faith, I know that Christianity is not Christian nationalism. I oppose my faith being used to whitewash a racist, violent, and dangerous ideology. Ms. Tyler, I have a few questions for you, but let's start with this. How does religion differ from religious extremism, and why is religious extremism, specifically Christian nationalism, threaten the safety and lives of people in our communities?
Well, I think that religious nationalism is this tendency to merge our religious and national identities, and it can occur along a spectrum, but can also be co-opted by those in power to enforce a certain religious viewpoint on everyone else. And that's why it's such an urgent threat to religious freedom. But it is also, as you point out, an urgent threat to democracy. And it's because it is taking this increasingly violent aspect. And we saw that on January 6th in the way that Christian nationalism was used as a permission structure and as a uniting ideology for people who were here at the Capitol that day in search of a political cause that was then infused with religious fervor.
And what would you say the relationship is between white supremacy and Christian nationalism?
Christian nationalism often overlaps with and provides cover for white supremacy and racial subjugation. That's because the Christian and Christian nationalism is not so much about theology as it is about an ethno-national identity.
Yeah, and Christian nationalists have played vital roles in very violent attacks. Even recently, the killing of 11 people attending services at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. The killing and murder of 9 people attending a Bible study at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, the Emmanuel 9. The killing of 33 people shopping at Walmart and Tops in El Paso and Buffalo. Ms. Tyler, how does Christian nationalism pose a threat to our democratic institutions?
Well, I think all of those examples are what happens when this ideology of Christian nationalism is used by white supremacists to try to justify their violence. It uses the symbols and the language of Christianity to try to justify what is indefensible. And it turns, again, their hatred into a religious cause, into something that they believe is ordained by God.
Most Christian nationalists claim to support religious freedom while at the same time working to have the exact opposite of that happen. Have you noticed a coordinated attempt in America to co-opt the right of religious freedom to try and justify stripping rights away from people?
Well, I do think that language really matters here in definitions, and too often we hear the language of religious freedom being used for what is really religious privilege or Christian nationalism. True religious freedom requires equality for all people regardless of religious belief, and that's why it's so important, as our Constitution promises, that the government will stay neutral when it comes to religion to allow all religions to flourish.
And this threat to democracy has made its way to Congress. I mean, my colleague, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, has said, quote, Christian nationalism is actually a good thing. It is an identity that Republicans need to embrace, and I am being attacked by the godless left because I said I am a proud Christian nationalist, end quote. My colleague, Representative Lowen Boebert, said, quote, the church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk, end quote, junk being the Constitution and Bill of Rights. The Bible itself in 2 Corinthians actually warns us against this. Paul warned against this. He warned us against people who would preach of a Christ that differs from the true Christ that we learn about in the Bible. That's exactly what Christian nationalism is doing. I condemn religious extremism everywhere, globally and domestically. We have to recognize the threat it poses to our most sacred freedoms and root it out everywhere. And I think it's incumbent, especially upon us as Christians, and me as a Christian, to be at the forefront of the fight to ensure that white nationalism and Christian nationalism doesn't see the light of day. Thank you, and I yield back. Thank you so much, Mr. Ranking Member. Good afternoon. I want to thank our incredible panel who have come from all across the country to be here with us, and thank you to our audience. I'm looking forward to hearing your critical insight into the current state of gun violence in America and the path that we need to go towards to prevent gun violence. This issue is very near and dear to me. As was mentioned, I've spent most of my life fighting to end gun violence. It was the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012 that pushed me to become an advocate in the first place. And learning the stories and coming up for that vigil really changed 15-year-old Maxwell Frost's life and really presented me with a call to action that I then answered. After that, I got involved in politics, but it was all because of gun violence prevention. In 2021, gun violence surpassed car accidents as the leading cause of death for children, being responsible for 1 in 5 child deaths. And this isn't just about mass shootings. I always like to tell people, think about all the carnage. Think about all the media. Think about all the trauma and stories that mass shootings bring. And then know the fact that mass shootings account for 1% of gun violence. I don't say that to diminish mass shootings. I say that so people can really recognize how huge this issue is and how many lives it takes on a daily basis. And the other number that we don't often talk about is the people who are shot who then survive, and then the people who are surviving on a daily basis in their community with daily gun violence and community gun violence that we see that predominantly impacts black and brown folks. Black trans women and LGBTQ plus people also being disproportionately impacted by gun violence. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, London Price, a black trans woman in my state of Florida, was pistol whipped and shot to death in front of her grandmother in South Florida. Not a peep from the governor, not a peep from state legislators who claim to fight for all Floridians. Recently, or back in March, I introduced my first bill, which was to create a federal office of gun violence prevention, something that I actually had been fighting for long before I got to Congress when I was a national organizing director at March for Our Lives. This was a call to action of the administration and of Congress given by the movement over the last 3 to 4 years. And it meant a world when the White House took that bill and made it, implemented it via executive order. And now for the first time in our country's history, we have a federal office of gun violence prevention. Staffed, and the staff is really important here because you can make an office and staff it with a bunch of hacks who don't know what they're doing, but the president didn't do that. He put in charge Greg Jackson and Rob Wilcox, 2 survivors of gun violence who have been doing this work for a long time, and led by Stephanie Feldman, who's been advocating for this work from within the White House. And they're working alongside gun violence prevention advocates, leaders from across the country, and I'm really excited to see the work that they do. And that win is because of the movement that had been fighting for it for upwards of about 4 years on that very specific ask. And it's not a coincidence that just a week and a half after that office came to be, my district in the city of Orlando received a check of $1.5 million from the Department of Justice Community Violence Intervention Initiative. And we're not done. We're going to get a lot more money. But the reason why this money's been dispersed in such a quick way is because of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention that is advocating and fighting for the speedy implementation of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That was also a result of the tireless work of advocates and people who have been fighting for it within the organizations and movement. They also got right to work on the third mission and one of the most important missions of the office, which is to act like a FEMA, to go and respond when gun violence strikes a community. And we saw them in the ground in Maine to support survivors and advocates there. In fact, it was just last week that a colleague of mine, Marjorie Taylor Greene, put in an amendment to defund the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. One that kind of skirted past the media. A lot of people don't know about this. We voted on this amendment on the floor. And it worried me because I thought they would have a good chance of defunding this office. But we got right to work, speaking with Republicans, speaking with Democrats that don't often vote the way we want them to vote on this issue. And in a bipartisan way, we defeated that amendment with 8 Republicans who voted against it, which I think shows that there is a light at the end of the tunnel with this issue. The gun lobby is more afraid now more than ever as they see a multiracial, multi-generational army of Americans who are not going to relent on the demands for common sense gun reform. And we got to be clear, organizations like the NRA and like organizations that say that they are an advocacy group for gun owners, it's a bunch of BS. They're not an advocacy group. They're fronts for the gun lobby. And this issue, much like many other issues, in part we don't see good work on in the federal government because of corporate greed being valued over the lives of people and humans. And gun violence prevention is not any different in that retrospect. As our communities once again reel from the senseless loss of life in Maine and even more senseless void of congressional action, it is critical that we hear from survivors and leaders in the gun violence prevention movement to discuss a coordinated response to these tragedies. Our communities, the innocent victims, and the families who have lost loved ones deserve more than our thoughts and prayers. They deserve our commitment to a path forward in a world without gun violence, looking at the issue holistically, from school shootings to mass shootings, to shootings that happen in our community, to shootings by police officers, where if you are a black teenage male, the most likely cause of death for you is to be shot and killed by the police. This is all gun violence, and we have to attack this issue in a holistic way. Thank you, and I yield back.